Hello and welcome back to Garden Obsessed. My name is Carla, and today we are going to be taking soil samples. So this is something that in my everyday work life I do a lot of annually, but it's something that I never take the time to do at home. And I'll go over the whys and the whats and the hows. I'm just showing you the items that I'm going to need to use here. So today I'm going to be using a spade. You can also use soil probes if you have access to those. There's a couple different kinds. A bucket to mix your soil in, and some kind of a container. I'm using boxes that are provided by my provincial lab. And you would think I would learn that, they're easier to put together without wearing gloves, but here you'll see me awkwardly trying to put them together with my gardening gloves on. So why soil sample at all, and why now? Well, I recently refreshed some of my old training and was reminded how important it actually is. I've also been gardening in several of these areas for 6 or 7 years now and have never tested the soil. So the amendments that I add every year, I want to make sure that I'm adding the right things in the right amounts and that I am building my soil and not causing any detriment or any over-fertilization or anything like that. In particular, I am very curious about the pH. I live in Atlantic Canada. We typically have acidic soils, and that can actually impede the ability of the plant to take up nutrients. It can make some of the nutrients unavailable for the plants. So it doesn't matter how much I'm adding or how much there actually is in the soil. If my pH is not in an ideal zone, which is typically around 6.5, some of those nutrients might be unavailable, and it won't matter how much I'm adding. So another reason I want to soil sample is that I have several different areas that are growing different types of things. This garden that you see me sampling right now is where I had the dahlias planted last year, and I'm planning to grow cut flowers here this year. I also have a vegetable garden that's been in raised beds. I'm also going to sample where the cut flowers were last year, which is a brand new garden. And I'm also going to sample the lawn because I want to see what shape that's in. I think it definitely needs limed. That hasn't been done in several years, but I just want to double check and see. So that's some of the whys that I'm soil sampling. Now let's talk about how. So I mentioned there was a few different types of soil probes that you could use. I'll throw one type up now. This is the type we generally use. It's a soil probe type. It takes a cylinder sample. Typically we go to a plow depth, which would be 10 to 15 centimeters or about 6 inches. I don't have one of those at home. So I'm using a spade, and essentially I'm taking a wedge out of the soil, and you'll see me kind of brush away some of the sides because the spade it doesn't have straight sides. It has angled sides. And I want to make sure every layer of the soil that I'm sampling is evenly distributed. I'm going to show you here. I don't think you can see it very well, but I'm going to try to even out the soil layers so that the bottom is just as represented as the top layers of soil. There is another type of sampler that you can use. Generally, we use it for more stony soils, and that's an Agar type soil sampler. But today I'm using a spade. You could also use a shovel. My spade is about 6 inches deep, so I'm just going down to the top of the spade. The other thing you want to be careful of is I have my bucket, so I'm trying to take representative samples, and you would do this randomly. I'm trying to avoid plants in the section that I'm in right now, but you want to take I typically try to take at least 5 or 6 samples in my small gardens. You could have pockets that are different than other pockets, and you generally will. So the more samples that you take, the more representative it's going to be of that garden as a whole. And as I'm going to manage it as a whole, I want to maximize the accuracy for the entire garden. So I'm just mixing up the soil here to make sure it's good and uniform, and then I'm going to fill my little soil box. You don't have to have, a box or a container even from the lab that you're using. I happen to have these, so I am using these. You generally want between 1 and 2 cups of soil, and these boxes are made for this purpose and they're the right amount, so it's easy to use them. I mentioned I'm dropping my samples off at the provincial lab. So I'm located in Nova Scotia, and luckily for me, I don't live very far away from the provincial lab, and I will drop these off in person. There's also, if you're in the Maritimes, there's a provincial lab in Prince Edward Island. There used to be one in New Brunswick. There isn't anymore, and your samples, if you are in New Brunswick, are typically sent to Prince Edward Island. If you are in the US, I believe your state extension office would be able to direct you where to send your samples. And a lot of times when you do not live close to the lab, as I'm lucky to do, they can be sent through the mail, and you'll get the results back typically, and it's definitely less than 2 weeks. It's typically about a week here, depending on how busy the lab is. I mentioned I'm sending in samples from a few different garden types, so I will be sure to label the gardens first of all, so that I know where they came from. But I will also indicate on my paperwork when I submit the samples what I'm growing in each of the areas. If you provide that information, I will get back a recommendation for that type of crop. So, cut flowers will be what I'm growing in 2 of the gardens. Mixed vegetable garden will be, or mixed vegetable crop will be what I provide for my raised beds, and I'll indicate that lawn is what I'm growing for the last sample. So how much do these cost? Well, it's going to be different in different areas and for different tests. We have a standard package at our provincial lab, which runs about $25. And that will give me most of the macro and micronutrients, as well as the pH. So these 4 samples are going to run me about $100. The good news is that I won't have to do this every year. I will plan to do this about every 3rd year. If you have fewer areas that you're testing, you can certainly test every year, and it would be good information to have. But because I'm testing 4 or 5 different areas, that's going to add up, and I don't think it absolutely has to be done every year. This is a small scale home garden. If this were my livelihood, I probably would invest in annual testing. But for my personal home use, I think this should be just fine. This is certainly going to give me a very good indication of what has been happening in my garden and how I should move forward with nutrient additions and amendments for the foreseeable future. When I get my test results back, I will certainly share those in an upcoming video, and we can talk about what some of the things mean and some of the things that I will do to address any issues that I may be experiencing in any of these areas. I am by no means an expert, but I think a lot of times people are intimidated and soil results seem very complex, and people are afraid to take soil samples because they don't know what they mean. I hope by sharing this process and going through the results when they come back together, that this will kind of help to demystify this process. So here I am mixing up this second composite soil sample here from the raised bed vegetable garden. I took a soil sample from as many beds as I could, kind of avoiding the ones that I've already got planted. I should have done this earlier in the season, but didn't get that done until now. I won't make you guys watch me take 2 more samples. It's the same process for the other 2 gardens, or well, for the other garden and the lawn. Although when I do the lawn, you want to make sure you remove any of the vegetation on top, so remove the grass. You can either do that after you take the sample, just kind of cut that top part off, or I like to just use the heel of my foot and kind of kick the grass out of the way. So that's it for today, guys. I hope you found this interesting and useful, and thank you for watching. See you next time.